Okay. PowerPoint is up in the middle.
James, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I just need one where that should be.
Hi, James.
Good evening. How you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
Kind of glad the road is starting to open back up a little bit.
Mhm.
Melanie, how you doing?
Good evening. Hey, Bellamy. Hey, James. Hey, Cammie.
Hi there. And I see Nate. Hi, Nancy. I see you too.
Hey, Brian, how
Doing
you
well,
doing?
Jim.
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, excellent.
Glad to be here.
Hey, Brian. I'm Jeff.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, I guess the last person, I guess to James and Jeff and Nancy, Bill will not be on tonight. Bill has birthday husband duties. So we'll 6:30 now. We do have quorum at this point. The only other person would be Philip, and I don't. I mean, he can sometimes drops in when he can. So, yeah, that's the only other person. So, I mean, with that, I mean, we do have quorum. So why don't we go ahead? Oh yeah, Miss. Oh, that's right, Miss
Gilmore.
Miss Gilmore. Wonder if she'll call in. Let's see.
Well, Brian, what's I know you're going to introduce yourself, but I'm just curious, what state are you in?
I am in Massachusetts, one of the other Commonwealths.
I got you. I was up there in Massachusetts in March.
Okay.
And I had a little bit of time to check out a couple of different areas, and I was walking around the campus of Boston College, and it felt like my coat was a piece of paper. I mean, that wind was something else.
Yeah. We've all been talking about how the wind has picked up so much the last couple of years, with climate changing. It's just, and I like to bike. I'm a big cyclist, and
Right.
it's interesting sometimes. You're out there and you start going sideways. So. But we love it here.
Yeah, I want to definitely when I get a chance to kind of go up with my wife. There's a lot I want to see. I like a lot of architecture.
Mhm.
A lot of neat stuff up there. But it's definitely going to be sometime between now and or at least this time of year and about September for me.
Yeah. Well, and the fall is beautiful. I mean, it's packed with the colleges and
Right.
and it, but it's we have those nice New England leaves. So,
Oh,
and
yeah.
if you get up this way, let me know. I'd be happy to, if I can, take you around or at least point you in the right direction.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I will definitely take you up on that.
All right.
Ms. Robertson, are you there? Is Lisa there?
Your icon.
There she is. Congratulations,
Oh, thank you.
I guess, or condolences, whichever.
Thank you very much. That's very nice.
Does everyone know the big news? We now have a full-time city attorney, not an acting,
Exciting.
as of Monday night, Tuesday night,
Monday night, yeah.
Monday night. Yeah.
Along those same lines, though, I was just about to send Bellamy an email. Whenever you all are ready, you could either amend your agenda later this evening and do it, or we can just put it on your next regular meeting agenda. But City Council approved an amendment of the ordinance to allow your contract legal counsel to work
I saw
on
that.
any issues that you would like. And so Ms. Hudson has provided a modified agreement to match up with the amended ordinance. And I have the signature of the finance director approving and endorsing it to verify that funding is available. So whenever the board's ready, it can take a look at that and vote on it, and then the chair can sign it. So I'll forward it to Bellamy, and he can send it to the rest of you to have a look, and then you can decide when you might like to go ahead and vote on it, so your contract legal counsel can also help you with a wider range of things.
Great.
You know if it's substantially different? I mean, other than those particular parts, substantially different from what was before?
No, it's exactly the same. All that Ms. Hudson did, if you recall in the previous contract, we had to list out the 4 categories of things that the attorney could work on, which were the limits in the ordinance. Now the contract has just been changed to say that the attorney can work on anything authorized by city code section such and such. And so it was a pretty simple amendment, but all we did was take out the previous 4 categories of things that they were limited to.
Okay. Does anybody, so we have everyone that's going to be on tonight. Does anyone have any objection to, I guess, talking or dealing with this before we start the training? Okay. So at 6:35, I want to call this meeting of the Police Civilian Review Board to order. Would like to, if Nicole, Miss McElhaney, and Mr. Core would give us a few minutes, would like to tackle this issue of accepting. I know we haven't, read the full documentation, but as Miss Robertson has stated, a lot of it updates to give us the or allow legal representation, Miss Hudson, to fully help us more than we've already been helped. Does anybody have any objections or comments they would like to make before we, well, I can't put forward the motion, but before someone puts forward the motion, Miss Robinson is not here tonight. So I guess we would just kind of do a yay or nay vote. But does anyone have any objections?
Well, shouldn't we have the public have a quick view of it? Do we have a screen share? I mean, I know you say it's not substantially different, but there is a difference. And just, speaking of transparency, is there any reason why they shouldn't be able to take a look at it before we yay or nay it? Can we screenshot it, screen share it?
I just sent it to each of you who I can see. I can't, who is on the telephone? I can forward it to that person.
I think it's Ms. Gilmore, I think.
Okay,
Yeah,
let me send it. Let me send it to her as well. And just for the public's information, anyone who followed the amendment to the city code at the city council meeting on Monday night, those are the language in the legal services contract tracked the ordinance very specifically. So the same things that we took out of the ordinance, we took out of the legal services contract. Otherwise, there were no changes to the contract.
At the end of the day, and somebody like me who's a layman, you know, the law firm was limited as to what they could help us with. And so now this will allow us to get all 8 cylinders out of their capability as opposed to 4 cylinders. And then
That's right.
us as everyday folks trying to scratch our head and fill in the gaps uh and we have the brilliant Lisa Robertson, but you know, it's also you know, having that additional, you know, legal mindset, in my opinion, is key to our success.
That's very true. Thank you, James, for putting it that way, because I think that sums it up, you know, very succinctly for anybody that is watching or, you know, may have a question about why we're doing it tonight like this.
The other thing I guess we'll have to look at too is, you know, I said this in another meeting. We never hired to this point. I say we, but you know, we're not in control of it. But the city has not hired an executive director, so I think there's some funding left, you know, from fiscal year, what is it, 21. So, but that's something to keep an eye on. I don't know the exact numbers, but just, you know, how much we have for this remaining fiscal year. 'Cause obviously, more services mean more money, but I would think we'd be in good shape, being as though if that money can be migrated over to legal services that would have been spent at this point on a executive director, which I guess there's like a month or 2 left. So,
Is that money fungible, Lisa?
That's something that we can talk with the budget director about, but it's my understanding that in your budget, there is some flexibility to use the funding that's been allocated.
Great.
That's not my area of expertise, but I don't believe that you have really firm line items, but I can have Chrissy Hamill get in touch with the Chair Brown and verify that.
Great. We probably should know that.
Right.
yeah, because we don't want to come to a point where they says, hey, we'd love to help you guys, but you're broke. So
Yeah, I don't think you're in danger of that in the next 2 months. So,
right.
and then you get to start over. So it would be a good idea to take advantage of the firm's services in these next 2 months, or 3 if you count May, because that means you'll get the maximum amount of bang for the bucks that you have both this year and next year.
Right.
Is there a motion to accept the updated contract, or are we looking to postpone till the 13th?
I would move that we go ahead and vote on the amended agreement with Sands Anderson in terms of our legal representation tonight.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay. Miss Robinson is not here, so I don't know if I can pull the board, Lisa, but I'll. I guess we'll.
I think
Go
you
ahead.
can do that as long as each of you voices your vote individually. That'll be fine.
Okay. All right. So I'll pull the board. Mr. Brown, yes. Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Miss Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Watson,
Yes.
Miss Gilmore.
Wait a minute, what are we voting on again?
We are voting. The current contract for legal counsel only allows our legal representation to provide services for us in 4 specific areas that are basically constricted from what we need going forward to get a lot of this ordinance work done. On I guess Monday, City Council voted to update that ordinance so that our legal representation can do more of the work that we currently need done, and that's what we are voting on, accepting that new contract with legal counsel.
Oh, okay.
And you're
Okay.
sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. and Mr. C is recorded as absent. Mr. Mendez is recorded as absent. So it passes 5-0.
Great.
And from there, we will turn it over to Ms. McElhaney and Nicole.
Thanks, Bellamy. Let me just get the screen up here. Okay. So thank you all for being here and allowing us to meet with you one more time to finish out our training. So tonight is session 5. And before we start, we have a new trainer with us today, Brian Core, and I just want to turn it over to him for a moment so that we can learn a little bit more about you, Brian.
Thank you, Cameron. So first of all, I really appreciate being able to be part of this, and I just want you to know as we go through this day that this is pretty special for me because I haven't had a chance to work with you all. So I am Brian Core. I am the director of the Civilian Oversight Office in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've been doing that work since 2010. And I also work for the city's Peace Commission, which works on a range of issues, everything from responding to traumatic events that affect the community to sister cities to building resiliency. So I have been involved in NACOL almost since the beginning of my time in oversight. 3 weeks into my job as the director of oversight, I had the opportunity to go to the NACOL conference, and through that got a lot of support, got a mentor, got very involved, and ended up serving 3 years as president. So I am currently serving my last few months on the board in my role as immediate past president. And I have been able to do work like this with communities all over the country, even before the pandemic. So now it's a little bit easier. Have done some work with Arlington County, so I have a little familiarity with some of the issues going on in Virginia through that, and also have been following things through NACOL and the work that Cami and Leanna Perez have done with you. So again, just very happy to be here, very excited to be part of helping your community do this work.
Thank you for that, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. So as always, before we begin this session, I wanted to see if there were any follow-up questions from session 4. And I know that you guys had a lot of questions, and surrounding some of the information we talked about, I let Brian know about a lot of those questions. I know that there's a lot of stuff that has come up because of the proposed new ordinance language. So Brian is aware of that, and we are going to be dealing with some of that specifically in the latter half of the training today, but I did want to, of course, give you space here to voice any questions as well. Okay. Hearing none, we will just jump in. So tonight we're going to tackle 2 topics. The first one is minimum training standards for civilian oversight. And the second one is identifying and addressing challenges and opportunities, which is one of the main reasons Brian is here. This is opportunities and challenges and how we deal with them and look at them is something that Brian is well versed in and has helped a lot of communities with. So I'm very glad he was able to be with us this evening. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about minimum training standards. So training is definitely can be a heavy lift. I think I will say that you all as a board are way ahead of the curve. There are most boards across the country don't have the benefit of having training this one-on-one time to learn about things that specifically affect their ordinance, the work they're doing, that deals specifically with these issues in their community, like we've been able to do over the last 5 sessions. But also there's more than there's many components to training that are important to the work. And so I think that we'll talk a little bit about those different things and make it maybe not so heavy of a lift for you. So there's two separate sections of training I want to talk about. And first, I'm going to talk about board and commission members and training specifically for them. But then I'm also going to talk about the training for staff. And while there's some overlap, there are some differences. So for board and commission members, it's really important, if possible, to do training shortly after appointment, so that people hit the ground with the knowledge they need. For those of you who maybe started, a year ago now, there's some things that perhaps you wish you'd known at the beginning that you know now. I know when I was a board member in Indianapolis, there were a lot of things that I wish I had known from the start. But as soon as training can get on board, and so now as you're moving into your second year, and when there's a new ordinance in place, depends on how that will affect current sitting members of the board, just to make sure that that training happens as soon as someone comes on the board. It will help them feel more comfortable with the work at hand. Also, it's important to remember that given diverse backgrounds, there are a lot of people that come to this work, to the board, without any previous knowledge of civilian oversight, with little or no knowledge of law enforcement policy and procedures. They might not know anything about criminal case processing, legal standards for assessing evidence, reaching dispositions. So it's important to remember that everybody's coming at a different pace and with a different set of knowledge. And so training should be created with that in mind. I think it's also important to remember that although I'm a huge proponent of training being provided by civilian oversight professionals and experts, there are lots of others that can provide that training as well. That includes community and government organizations and law enforcement. Training should be developed with all of those partners in mind to meet the need, and in a way that meets all skill levels, as we mentioned before. I think also it's important to note that refresher courses shouldn't be shied away from. The field of civilian oversight, and as you've seen since you've been doing this work yourselves, laws change, policies and procedures change, best practices sometimes and effective practices evolve. So it's important to have refresher courses as often as you're able, so that you are up to date on all of those things. It's also important to remember that there's a lot to be learned from organizations such as the National Alliance on Mental Health, mediation centers, homeless or houseless advocacy organizations, Urban League, members of city government, U.S. attorneys, prosecutors. So there is a vast world out there for you to get information. And it might be a little bit here and a lot there and a little bit more here, but collectively that provides you a solid base to do the work. A lot of people sometimes, particularly when an ordinance is being created, tend to think that law enforcement might not need to be part of this training process. A lot of that has to do with conflict and independence. But I think that it's really important to remember that they're the ones, many of them are the experts on the policies and procedures that they are supposed to follow, and how they are trained on those policies and procedures. So working in partnership with the police to develop a training program that lets you know about their policies and procedures is really important. An excellent example, in Indianapolis, we did 20 hours of training. We were mandated by ordinance to do 20 hours of training a year, and actually within the first 6 months of each year. We worked with IMPD's training facility so that we could develop a program that not only gave us information about what they thought would be beneficial for us to know, but also we were able to put in our 2 cents about some things like cases that we were seeing, particular policies, things like traffic stops, for instance. We would see complaints that would come through that were the result end result of a traffic stop. So knowing more about how they're trained on executing traffic stops was really important to us. So definitely working with them there so that it is some of the things that they believe that you should know and some of the things that you believe you should know as well to come up with a comprehensive program. I think
Cami
it's,
goes to, oh, I'm sorry. I
oh,
just
no,
wanted
go
to,
ahead.
yeah, and I will just acknowledge that Cami and I have never done this where we're not in the same room. So this is a new experience. I can know you just nudge Cami and say, hey, I want to say something. But I just want to add that in Cambridge, for example, in about 10 days, we are doing a training with our board where we will get training from the director of 911, because that's a big issue right now. 911 calls, how are they handled? What is dispatch being told, and what are they telling the police or whoever responds? So there are a lot of different ways that that kind of training can come from people within the city that are connected to first response. That's important for your board and others to know how they do things and how they do their work.
Absolutely. I also want to mention that that you also, particularly, all of you are very familiar right now with how your board came about. But as the board ages, history, review of enabling legislation, and the history of that legislation is really important for new board members as they come on, so that they have a clear understanding of where it started, where they are now, and then also a very clear understanding of the authorities and mandates of the ordinance itself, so that they can do the job. I think you also should consider, when you're working with law enforcement for that portion of the training, touring facilities so that you really have a clear understanding of, you know, what does booking look like? What does, you know, going to the canine training facility, talking to officers who actually work in the canine unit. Ride-alongs are an excellent way to learn about interaction of officers with the community. And doing them, when I've done them, I tried to spread them out so that I did them in different districts at different times of the day, because, you know, riding along on a Saturday afternoon is a lot different on one side of town than riding in the middle of at 3 a.m. in a different part of town. I mean, it's just different, and it is incredibly important to understand a little bit more about what's going on. And then when you're reading those complaints, kind of understanding those more as well. So training of staff is very similar, but I want to emphasize that training of staff should happen yearly. Even if it's the same set of staff, they need to have that information, particularly when I was talking about, you know, information in the oversight world changes, whether it's effective practices, state laws, local laws, the policies and procedures. Being up on that is very important for the staff members so that they can do their job in a professional manner. And that involves continuing education, professional development, any opportunities that can be given to the staff should be. That means that training must be part of an ongoing part of the budget. And sometimes I would suggest also travel for that, because there are, and I know NACOL has training you can travel to, but we're not the only ones. There are also some great trainings out there that might be of benefit, whether it's on investigations, practices, or community engagement strategies. There are some other things out there that could be of benefit as well to the staff. I also would like to say that I think it's really important, and I realize it doesn't really fall under training, but it's really important for the staff to develop kind of a circle of professional contacts. One of the best parts of the civilian oversight world is that everyone loves sharing information. No one wants to have to learn a mistake twice. And so, you know, for instance, say a year from now, after you've really got your feet under you and you're moving along, and you decide, you know what, a mediation program might really benefit the city. And so having a group of professionals, and NACL can be included in that, to call them and say, so we're thinking about this. Do you know some other agencies who have started mediation programs from scratch? What different formations of those programs could be found? What seems to be more effective? And so that way, some people that you can call and rely on. Also, when you're, there is rarely a oversight agency director that has not learned a valuable lesson about the media or or about how to deal with elected officials, and that having that circle can be incredibly helpful when a situation comes up and you want to know how others out there have handled it. And then again, definitely part of your funding structure. And then making sure that the director is, if there is additional staff, that the director is also prioritizing the education not only of themselves, but also of the staff and the board. Really, education needs to be fully circulated within the group for that to work.
And again, I'll just add quickly, I think one important element of that to always remember is that part of your legitimacy is that you have training, that you are keeping up on current events, that you have awareness of developments in the field, that you understand, and you don't have to all be lawyers, but you do need to keep up with what's happening in civilian oversight. And that's even more true, as Tammy just said, for the staff. So very, very important, not just for your own work, but for people to understand that you actually know what you're doing and you are well trained to do it.
Thanks, Brian. And I know you all have heard, I mean, one of the largest arguments against civilian oversight, particularly from law enforcement, is how can a group of people who don't do our job come and tell us how we should be doing our job? Well, there are many counter arguments to that, but one of the ways that you can show that or prove that to not be true is through the education process, that you are as well trained as you possibly can be on all aspects of the work. So last, I want to talk about the law enforcement's role in training just a little bit more. I realize this is a little bit of a perhaps a repeat, but not only should law enforcement members be included in the development of the training process and also help with some of the training, I think it's also important that oversight becomes part of a regular part of the training academy. I think it's important for staff and occasionally board members to attend the academy, to see classes, to see what law enforcement, how they're being trained on specific things. And I think it's also important for there to be a regular standing role for the director and perhaps some of the board members as well to come and do presentations on civilian oversight so that the law enforcement understand the role and the mandates of the agency as well. As much information as can be given is going to help the process in the end. And I think it also helps, I think a lot of times when a group only hears about an outside group from their own, that they may not fully understand that oversight practitioners, they don't come to the work with claws and fangs and they're out to get everybody. They're out to work towards a more accountable system that's fair and just, and they want to do the work in a legitimate manner. And so by being able to make as many of those connections as possible will help further the true nature of what you are trying to do. So
Cami,
please, yes.
You had mentioned, I guess, in the academy that there be, a class on oversight. I was reading and looking at how the U.S. does police training versus how it's done overseas. It looks like, our average is 21 and a half weeks here in the U.S., whereas overseas and I don't know if I've asked this before, overseas it's, 3 years, or you need a bachelor's degree. Is there a push in the oversight world to kind of enhance what we do here in the U.S. And how those conversations come about?
So I can say there hasn't been a nationwide push for that. That is a coordinated push, but in individual jurisdictions, many oversight agencies work towards increased educational standards, whether it be the amount of training they receive, the amount of continuing education training that they receive, and in some jurisdictions also the level of education that they receive before they're able to even enter the academy. And then also, I mean, that extends even further. There are some states who are trying to look at, whether or not chiefs or sheriffs even have to have been former law enforcement to do that job. And so there are a lot, and NACOL itself doesn't have a stance on that per se, but I say that just to say that there are lots of movements around to enhance that education.
Okay.
Piece.
Thank you.
James?
So, I do think the education piece, what you guys are offering, is critical. So as we're looking out, also finishing out this fiscal year, and more training, I think would be helpful. Are there some other, and of course we're going to stay close to NACOL, but are there also some other? You mentioned there's some other organizations too that, because I know in some of my searches I haven't found a whole lot of folks out there that offer what you guys offer. What are some of those other resources for training or?
Yes. So I will say that as far as specific to civilian oversight, really NACOL is the only one that is specific to civilian oversight, the practice of. There are people out there though that do training. Some of it is more from a law enforcement perspective. I can think of, there's and I can't think of the name of this company, but Gareth Jones, who had worked in oversight for a very long time now, does training on investigations and how to conduct them and what to look for. And there are also some trainings out there, and Brian, you might be able to think of a few too. I know that doesn't PERF have some trainings? And
yeah, I believe PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum, even IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which you might not think of, but they've had initiatives, I think, for about 3 years now, looking at officer wellness and safety, which is not just about officers not getting killed, but also about mental health and wellness for officers, their understanding mental health and wellness for members of the community and their interactions. And again, people like Gareth Jones out of Canada. And then there are former police who do training for police and non-police. There's a person, Eric Daigle, out of Connecticut, who's a lawyer and a former police officer who really focuses on civil rights and civil liberties training and helping police to understand how to make sure that they are following the law. And that can also be valuable for, I think, probably more for staff than board members, but depending on the kind of work you're doing, the nature of your relationship to investigations, those trainings can be very helpful for staff, because it's good to get people that are in the broader world, but are not laser focused on civilian oversight. And you might go to some of those trainings and go, 90% of it is good, that 10% I'm not sure about, and that's okay, because it's also important to know what's out there, how people are being trained, and what's kind of in the air, what people are talking about. I mean, a number of years ago, there were, excited delirium was a topic that got a lot of attention. And it was important for people in oversight to understand what police were being taught about excited delirium and what it was and what it wasn't. So there are a lot of those kinds of trainings out there that, and we can also help you kind of look for what might be appropriate if you have specific needs or specific concerns. But there are a lot of resources in addition to the core, which I would say is NACOL.
I think one of the things we have to be aware is that, like we were talking about the budget a few minutes ago, in relation to that, I don't know if like we have a line item for professional development as board members. Perhaps we do, but I don't recall specifically, that being a line item. So hopefully, when they proposed this budget last year during the early part of the budget cycle, professional development was, part of the mix. If not, maybe there'll be some way to to flesh that out, I hope, or hopefully find some free trainings that don't require any type of fee for the city.
Well, and I'll also tell you, in case some of you aren't aware, so there are, I'll start with the paid training first, Nancy, but I promise I will move to the free one as well. So just so you know, some other resources that NACO have throughout the year. We do webinars. We are trying to move to a monthly format. We've done, by June, we will have had 6 in 6 months. And those are normally an hour to an hour and a half long for members. They're $15. And they are on a host of topics. Recently, we have done death anxiety and police culture. We've done police surveillance techniques. We're also getting ready in June. We'll be doing one on the role of supervisors in changing the culture of policing. So they're on a variety of topics. We also are getting ready to announce we're going to have the virtual conference. You know, COVID has a lot of silver linings. And one of them for us was learning about, wow, how many more people we can reach and give training to when they, particularly when they have little to no budget. So we're going to continue at least for one more year with our virtual conference. But we are going to pair that with an in-person conference. So we'll have a virtual conference that'll run from August 16th to October 7th. And it will be almost a session a day during that time. And they'll be recorded. So if you can't make it, I'm pretty sure there will be no one that can make it all of those days, but they'll be able to watch it afterwards. And then we will be having an in-person training in Tucson this year in December, hoping everything is, that we're all clear to go in December. So keeping our fingers crossed, but that will be a 5-day conference, and we'll have some in-depth training on some different topics over some different tracks. And I will say, if I hope that all of you will be able to come, and I promise this is the non-marketing part of me, because Brian knows that marketing is one of my, it is not my forte. I'm really bad at self-promotion but when the first year I was on a board in Indianapolis in 1998, I had the conference was in Indianapolis. So I had the pleasure of going. And I have to tell you, it was amazing, because the fact that there were all of these people doing the same work I was doing in my city, where I felt very lonely doing the work, was, it was eye-opening. And so you will find that our conferences, although they have amazing trainings, that was the self-promotion part. Although they have amazing trainings, it's like a homecoming. It's like a reunion every year of people coming together and really leaving feeling like they're part of a family. So if you have a chance to go to them, if for no other reason, that is one of them. And there are scholarship opportunities for that. And so I will make sure, I don't know if all of you are signed up on our listserv or a mailing list yet, but I'll make sure that that happens, so that as these training opportunities come about, that you're aware of them.
And then I'm sorry, if I may, just very quickly, I don't want to throw you off, but I want to just deeply emphasize, if you can find a way, even if not everyone can go in person, because you can't imagine how powerful it is to be in a room with a whole bunch of other people that have the same experience. Because if you haven't already, you will learn that it is very challenging. People are looking at you from all sides, being very critical, being very concerned that you're doing too much, doing too little, not doing it right, doing it wrong, doing it yesterday, doing it tomorrow. And we all share that experience. And it doesn't mean that we can't improve and all those things, but to be able to hear other people's experience, to know that we all are dealing with those same pressures of the public, of activists, of people who are filing complaints, of elected officials, law enforcement leaders. It's a complicated mix in our world. And as I said in my intro, just like Cami, I went to the NACOL conference and I was hooked. So we're kind of trying to recruit you, but it's also an incredible experience for you. I mean, that's why I'm still doing this work. So.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, just from some of the trainings that we've had here and just connecting with other people on LinkedIn, I think what I found is this community has been open about connecting with each other and sharing information, even with, folk in DC. And then there was another guy just read in California. So I think the conference would be something super exciting.
Mm-hmm. And then I also want to tell you that all of our webinars do eventually end up online. So if you go to our training tab on our website to webinars, and then there's an icon that says past webinars, you can scroll through those and watch any of them. And there are some great training topics. And then also, if there's ever a subject that comes up and you don't see a training topic for that, and you really feel like the board would benefit from hearing a little bit more, then let me know. And I will try to search out an old webinar or an old conference session or some resources from an old conference session to do what I can to help. I had a conversation the other day with another city that we're working with that they're looking at how they want to do their complaint intake process to make sure that they're meeting the needs of non-English speaking members of their community, and that they are ADA compliant in everything that they're doing. And so we had last year at our conference, we had one of the best presentations I've ever seen on both of those things. And so I'm sending them a link and they'll watch it. And so there's a lot of information out there. So never hesitate to ask, and either we have answers or the information or the link to the recording, or we know where to send you to maybe try and find somebody else who can help. So never hesitate. So before we move on, are there any more training related questions?
I have a question, but maybe I'll let you kind of get your flow going, and then I'll wait further down the road to.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well then I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to start talking about challenges and opportunities.
And thank you, Cami. So I want to say that I can lecture at great length, but my goal for this is to really engage. So I'm hoping to, lay out a little bit of a roadmap, and I want all of you to be talking and sharing, because I am not the expert in life in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the work you're doing, and you guys are. So I'm hopefully going to be a guide and a prompt and keep the conversation going. So I just want you to come into this conversation kind of in that space. So I think as we think about challenges and opportunities, you've probably done strategic planning for different things. And if you're like me, you love strategic planning and you hate it because the idea is amazing, and often the results are not what you hope, or there's this big plan, it sits on a shelf. So this is not strategic planning. This is not a SWOT analysis to figure out where you're going to go, but it is an opportunity to think about where you've come from, where you are, how you work through challenges, but even what those challenges are from your point of view. We're prepared to share some ideas about challenges, but we want to hear from you first, and then we can share what else we've seen, and maybe it will come up for you. So with that, let's go to the next slide. I never get to say that. I'm always running my own slide deck. I love this. This is fun. So stepping back, why are we here? Why are we here, right? 1619. We know about the 1619 project. I'm in Massachusetts. You guys are in Virginia, so I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. The history of Charlottesville, your city seal, 1762. Certainly an important date in Charlottesville, but things happened before that. Certainly things happened after. The history of segregation, Vinegar Hill, the massive resistance to integrated schools that took place, in Charlottesville and other places in Virginia. Again, I'm not the expert on any of these, but so I want to ask each of you, and I'll have to say something, but I want to offer an opportunity for each of you to share your voice on this. What are one or two things for each of you that stand out from the history of Charlottesville from 1619 to today that leads you to be in this training, leads you to be sitting on this civilian review board today? So I'll call on people if I have to, but I'm just going to allow people to start. So a couple of reasons from the history of Charlottesville that has led to your being on this board today. So I see Jeffrey's unmuted.
Yeah,
Please.
thanks, Brian. Golly, you could talk for hours about that, but certainly the history of Charlottesville, going back to the 20s when the KKK was marching down Main Street with all the city fathers in robes, to the poll tax, to the literacy test to prevent people of color from voting, to the getting rid of any ward system so that you could isolate power in the white communities and disenfranchise the black communities. I mean, it's just, Charlottesville loves to pat itself on the back as being, this bastion of progressiveness, but on race, it's really a pretty shameful history. And I come from a family that enslaved people before the Civil War, and I carry that with me, and I feel passionately about racial justice. And so that's my motivation for being here and trying to undo some of the history, the legacy of racism in Charlottesville, which is shameful.
Thank you.
I'd like to, if you talk about history, if Ms. Gilmore is up for it, if she could give us because she's, lived here all of her life and certainly can speak, from her vantage point about that. I don't know if she wants to. I hope I didn't put you on the spot, Ms. Gilmore, but would sure like to hear what you'd have to say about this question.
Well, I remember Vinegar Hill. I remember what comes to mind for me. I remember walking down through Vinegar Hill as a child with my father before there ever was a McDonald's or a Wendy's. I remember the homes that used to be there. I remember when they demolished Vinegar Hill, demolished those homes. I remember what the old downtown mall was like. I remember when Charlottesville was predominantly Black. I also remember hearing my parents and my grandparents and my aunties and them talk about it. I have my father that'll be 85 this year. He shares a lot of stories about what happened back then. But the one thing I remember was the riot of the hot summer of July of 1975. And I remember them tear gas in West Haven. And I grew up in West Haven. I remember just how awful it was. I remember how we suffered, all night long. And we weren't allowed to leave. I remember watching the police come through with the riot gear on, which we had never, ever experienced anything like that. I just remember people running, adults trying to scoop their kids up, and people running and crying. And, we didn't know that when they shot the tear gas in West Haven, we was coughing and, some of us was throwing up. I just remember my father running through the house. We letting the windows up, and he's telling us to let the windows down. And I just remember laying there all night long with my eyes burning and not being allowed to leave. And, we talk about integration. I remember, the school, when they integrated to school and how we was mistreated. I remember I was in the third grade, I believe. I was going to Burley Moraine, and I remember we had old rubbish white teacher that was really mean. If we stepped out of line, she would just beat us down through our back and our head. She wasn't a very nice lady. Her name was Miss Morris. And she was one of the meanest teachers, one of the meanest people I ever encountered in my life. My brother that passed last year, I knew he was mistreated, but he didn't begin to share his stories until he became older. He was very gifted, but nobody really tapped into that. They didn't even know how. And he was being beaten at the school, but he really didn't share those stories until he became an adult. How the teacher would keep him in because he couldn't sit still. And she would keep him in and would beat him. And he was telling me how she would pick him up, like hold him by his head and just pick him up. And just, it was awful. And what I see now, and how, our city has changed, but it's not for the betterment of us. And, like this, this past weekend, I'm a part of a program that my son started called the Buck Squad. And I was supposed to have been over in West Haven. They walked through, they canvassed the different neighborhoods. And something told me not to go, and I didn't. So my son called me. I think it was probably about 12, maybe, something after 12, and told me that he was in the middle. He was out there with some children, and they began to shoot. And he covered the kids, and he was running, carrying people's kids, hiding them on the porch because the porches are made of, there's walls, and they're made of cement. And he was scooping up people's kids, Let me go back a little bit. He told him to hit the ground. And then once he could see where he could get to safety with the kids, he was just scooping up people's kids, putting them on this porch. And he said to me, he's been through a lot. He's done a lot of things. But he said to me on the phone, he said, Mom, never, ever been through anything like that. He said, I've been involved in a lot of things, but nothing like that, where the bullets was just flying and the children is hollering and the mothers, fathers is crying and hollering off of the kids and they don't know where the children are. So, it just takes me back, it takes me back. And even today, y'all talk about, them marching down West Main Street. It seems to me to be the same thing. It's like a reoccurring nightmare, and people are still suffering. There are shootouts. I was looking at the news today. There was a shooting last night in West Haven, and it's just a reoccurring nightmare. And for some people, things have gotten better, but not for brown and black people. And my thought is, and I think about this a lot, it's just how I'm going to use the word migrate, how a lot of people have migrated here that do not look like me, and they have taken the city over. And nobody seems to care that you have brown and black people like me that are suffering. Some of them suffer in silence. Some of them act out. But we have a problem here that, they always talk about how beautiful Charlottesville is, but there's an ugly side to Charlottesville. And I'm going to say this, I think it's a sin and a shame because there's people in this town that know what's going on. But they choose to turn a blind eye because they don't have to deal with it. So, I just think about the history. I do a lot of research, and I heard that the gentleman said, he owned slaves. Well, I don't think it was, I think all of y'all own slaves, if the truth be told. So y'all need to be real with yourself. But I think it's a shame because it's like when I look, it's like a plantation that it's like a plantation when you ride through and you look and you see how people live, and it's not supposed to be like it. But the one thing, and I'm going to end on this, the one thing I said to my son when he called me, I said, I'll tell you what's going to happen. I say UVA is going to get involved because you got that big building called the Standard, the housing for the students. I didn't know that when I said this to my son that a bullet actually went through the window of the dorm up there. But I said once UVA, the president, gets a whiff of this, then maybe things would change. Because we, the people that's running this town, they are not doing a good job. And y'all know that there's a problem. Y'all know that people are suffering. Like I say, some people suffer in silence. I've been speaking out about this for years. And, people seem to turn a blind eye, like we're trying to put this board together. You know that it's needed. Everybody has something to say. They want to rip what everybody, you had the group that worked on this. And I'm sitting here now with this package before me. As y'all are talking, I'm taking notes, and at the same time, I'm just going through my packet, which I do from time to time. Well, we have something that they worked on, but they wanted to redo it. And my thing is, we need something with some teeth because, see, we the people that suffer, the brown and black people. Y'all white people, y'all not suffering. Y'all living a good life. And for once, I mean, whoever this man is, and I want to talk to you, this one that, was bold enough, and I appreciate you saying that your family owned slaves, because a lot of people act like that family didn't. But I want to talk to you because we need to bring about change. Nobody's trying to beat up the police, but we know that they do us wrong. Because look at this statistically. Look at what's happening all across this country. And Lord knows when they found Derek Chauvin guilty of killing George Floyd, it looked like the police went on a rampage of killing black people, brown and black people. Look like every other day I'm hearing about us being killed. So we know that there's a problem. Stop with the police. Stop getting mad because we're asking y'all for the same thing that y'all get of white people. Y'all treat them with dignity. Y'all treat them with respect. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. My son, I've canvassed with them before, but it's a lot going on. And I have my grandkids. But here's the thing. When they was after that shooting, and I want y'all police to know this, nobody's trying to beat up on y'all, but I know y'all can do better. Like Ms. Beard say, we got to learn how to get along, and it's not hard to do. But the one thing that happened on that night was when the police finally got there, they ended up getting mad because they wanted to know why did the Buck Squad get there before them? What difference does it make? And I want to say this on behalf, because I'm a part of the Buck Squad. I want to say this on behalf of the Buck Squad. The reason they was there before y'all, because that's what they do every weekend. They canvass these neighborhoods. That's what needs to happen. If you want to stop this, my son already told y'all how to get ahead of it. Listen to us. And not only listen, take heed to what we are saying. Take heed to what we are saying because we only want what's best for us. Y'all already got it. We want to get it. So just take heed and open up your heart and treat us like we're human beings. That's all I have to say.
Wow.
And I'll come in after Miss Gilmore because I grew up with both of her sons and have had my own experience in Virginia, not in Charlottesville specifically, but policing throughout the Commonwealth. I think there are challenges across the board. So I grew up I'm part of this Black community, growing up, and the way I was raised here in Charlottesville. It doesn't matter, where, my life has changed a little bit now, but we take care of each other, regardless. It doesn't matter. I mean, the community itself is kind of segregated in a specific space where we know, most each other or somebody's family. And what we do here in the Black community is take care of each other. So there's a book that I like to reference, Policing the Black Man, done by Angela Davis, a law professor at UVA, and it talks about some of the statistics about policing Black men, in this country. And just from my experience, from growing up here, from knowing some of the avenues of what the law, is supposed to afford everyone, and not really seeing that. That's what's gotten me into this space, because here we have roughly about 17,000 people living in poverty, and typically those who are most affected by the criminal justice system are those in poverty, and they don't necessarily have a voice all the time. And I feel, as a member, having grown up in this community with the knowledge base that I have, that it's my duty to give back to help some of those folk that don't necessarily have that voice.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to share about what in the history of the city of Charlottesville has brought you to this board? And
I could add a little anecdote to that. So I've been here for 30 years. I'm not a native of Charlottesville, but I feel like I am at this point. A lot of people have accepted me in the Black community that are from here. Something Nancy mentioned last time, that and something that some things that I've forgotten about over time, and maybe I pushed them back in my brain. But I remember maybe about 15 years ago, I used to work in restaurants. I was in graduate school at University of Virginia. And me and another African-American gentleman were getting off work. And at the time, they were looking for a serial rapist in Charlottesville. And a buddy of mine, same age as I am now, middle-aged Black man, professional guy, yada, yada. He goes to get into a cab to go home after we closed the restaurant down. And the cab driver takes him to the police station. They take him there and they swab him for DNA. Guy has no criminal record. There's no reason that, other than the fact that he was an African-American man, and that's who they were supposedly looking for. Same kind of profile guy. When I graduated, I lived with a bunch of guys. And another buddy of mine had his first job downtown, S&L Securities, big company. It's now S&P Global. He's out on the mall eating lunch with all his coworkers, dressed like you are in a sport coat. Here comes the police. Sir, we got to ask you a question. Right in front of all his coworkers, 25-year-old guy, maybe a little bit younger than that. Here comes the swab. During that time, I wonder, why has nobody swabbed me? I got lucky during that time, but I knew plenty of people that was happening to. And that was something I had pushed in the back of my head, my whole life, I've seen the same thing over and over. Look at the amount of people around the world it took just for Chauvin to be convicted, right? So very much like Bellamy Brown, okay, my own life, I've been pretty successful, and I have some, life's pretty good for me. So I feel like I need to give back and be a voice for those who can't, protect themselves. I don't have a lot of time. So I've got 3 kids and a whole bunch of stuff going on, but I want the best for African-American people. And that's why I'm here, so that's it for me. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm going to chime in a little bit and say how riveting Ms. Gilmore's talk about the deep history here in Charlottesville is, and that all of us need to listen to the Ms. Gilmores, the Mrs. Beards, the Ms. Careys in our community, and open our eyes and learn that history, because she's right. My history is so different, so different. And when I first started just sitting and listening, it was transformational. And tonight, to hear Ms. Gilmore speak about this community and going back years and years and years, and such as Chairman Brown, growing up here, and hearing what's brought us to this point of wanting to say, no, we this over policing that's occurred, that's no longer going to be the status quo. And we have been hobbled because of the pandemic of being able to do deeper work. And we're hopefully, if we can, start meeting in person, maybe in July, if the governor decides to vacate his orders about the pandemic. But I'm just, I think all of us need to hear that 5 to 10 minutes that Ms. Gilmore shared about the history of Charlottesville. All of the residents here, the 40, well, not all of them, because certainly some of them already know the history way more, but we need to hear that as, I think, part of public school education here and everywhere about where this community has started from. It started from a plantation culture, and 300 years later, we're still living in a plantation culture.
Mhm.
I want to first thank you all for sharing. So, when I ask questions like that, I never quite know what I'm going to hear from people, but I just appreciate, in some small way, being a witness to some of what you all have experienced in your lives. And to kind of go back to the image in the slide, the Sankofa bird, probably some of you know it well, some of you may have never seen it before, I don't know, but it's from West Africa, from the nation of Ghana. And there are many different ways to interpret it, but it's the image of a bird carrying an egg very carefully as it moves through life, but also looking backwards, because you have to know where you've come from in order to understand where you are and where you're going. And I'm not going to dig into all those questions on the screen about what does Charlottesville want, because I think you've described it. And what will your legacy be? I'm hearing a different Charlottesville, different America, a different society, ultimately. And what I'm taking from this is that each of you in different ways has expressed how the history and the present are intertwined, and that the work of the board is not going to fix everything in Charlottesville, but it's an important piece. It's a piece that resonates deeply: the history of policing, the history of violence, the history of law enforcement and control, plantation culture that is beneath everything in Virginia. So I want to thank you all for that. As we move on to the next slide, I want you just to kind of carry the spirit of remembering the past, but also thinking about the discrete work of this board, right? I mean, the board is looking at a very specific set of issues. So, Cami, if we can move to the next slide. Let's first think about what are the challenges that that you need to step through. So I'm going to ask people not to do paragraphs, but maybe just phrases, thoughts, or sentences. What are the challenges that you see ahead of you in your work as a board? I mean, you've named a couple as we had the earlier part of this discussion with Cami, but just popcorn style, just throw out, what are some of the challenges?
I think I guess the PR machine that typically goes in effect from law enforcement. I mean, obviously we have shootings, right now that are helping that effort, but typically law enforcement, whenever there's a push to, for police accountability, that PR machine will turn on and kind of run.
Okay, that's great. What else?
I think for me, it's demonstrating to the community that we have some teeth in this board and in the statute, and that we can make a difference. I think that the bar is high for us to overcome the skepticism about, especially white Charlottesville, talking the talk but rarely ever walking the walk.
Great, thank you. What else?
Fear of change, being comfortable in the status quo, but not willing to look outside the box. There's a distinct fear of change.
Mhm.
Okay. What else?
And I would say that I'm a very positive person, but I don't really see very many examples in America. In America, there's a lot of love about being an American, but I don't see very many examples where a city has been able to change a culture, because you really need to change a nation, But I feel like if we aren't here, then there's no chance at all, right? At least we got a chance to change something and hold people accountable. But I mean, it's everywhere you go. I've been to 44 states in the last 10 years and had great times at different places, but everywhere I got to watch. I rent a car, go somewhere, I'm looking, praying. I mean, it's just part of our history, and it takes a dynamic change in Charlottesville, but U.S. wide. I mean, was Chauvin the first? They said he was the first police officer that was ever convicted in Minnesota history, and there was like 3 or 4 other major uh, similar shootings, prior that have been national stories and since. So
Thank you.
I don't know what
Oh, please.
what's got to change to change American culture in that way.
No, so American culture, I'm going to jot that down as a challenge. A couple more. What else? Especially if someone who hasn't talked on this particular topic. Challenges you guys face.
You have to change your mindset. And I agree with what y'all are saying. Can y'all hear me?
Mm-hmm, we can hear you. So
Yeah.
changing the mindset.
The mindset and this culture, what we see today, this been passed down. It has been handed down from one generation to another. This goes back 465 plus years, and it's just the transferring of the spirit, and it's been passed down. And the reason we get so mistreated because they still got the same mentality that we like 3/5 of human beings. We are human beings. We are human just like y'all are. Change your mindset. Look at us for what we are. Look at our kids for what they are. Stop criminalizing my people. Stop criminalizing the children. I remember you would catch my grandson and you just would do him. They would do him so wrong. You would do my grandson dirty. I can go back to my father. My father shared stories with me. So it's the transferring of the spirit. You have to change your mind. And the other thing you have to realize, how would you feel if somebody treated you the way that you treat us? How would you feel if you could not walk down the street in peace? How would you feel if you was walking down the street at night and somebody pulled up on you and told you to put your hands on the car and they frisking you for no reason? No reason, or maybe they say there was something that just happened. You look like the suspect. That's been going on. And it happened with my father. It happened with my son. And now it happened with my grandson. And it's still happening with other kids in this community. So you have to look at people for what they are. We're God-given citizens just like everybody else. Change your mindset. Get your mind right. We're not criminals. We're human beings. And treat us like that.
Thank you so much. Again, I just appreciate the passion, the truth-telling that you keep bringing to us in this discussion. So I'm sorry, this is my transparency thing. It's just weird to ask someone to change the slide for me, but Cami, could you move us to the next image? So we came up with these, and surprisingly, a lot of what you said is on here. Very high expectations, fear of change, community trauma, that's sort of maybe a shorthand for some of the stories we've just heard, skepticism from law enforcement, maybe that's a gentle way to put it. And we had some other ones. Lack of understanding of oversight and its role. I think this kind of connects to the idea of we need to have teeth. We need to be able to demonstrate our impact. I think one of the challenges that I experience in my work, many of our colleagues have, is that people think you have more power than you have, or they think your role is bigger than it is. So it's important. That's an important challenge. Impartiality, right? There's a lot to say about that, but when there's individual specific cases, civilian oversight has to be impartial, even while holding the pain and the history and the reality of discrimination today. Having legitimacy with, I put in quotes, both sides, but with everybody is probably a better way to say it. We already talked about the need for training and people saying, well, maybe we can get free training, which means that there's some challenges in getting the training just because of budgets and timing and life. Some other ones we put up here are change can't wait, the fierce, that sense that we've got to do it now. We don't have time. We can't figure it out. We can't wait till something, we just got to do it now. And government processes take time, right? You can't just do something like you can in maybe a private business. Connect to that, meeting all the demands, because from what I've heard, there are going to be there already probably are very high expectations and demands. And you may run into something that's come up a lot in communities right now, which is that there's some stakeholders who feel like, you can't talk to those people. You need to talk to us. We're the people. Don't talk to them. And that can come from any place. And it's a challenge, I think, because you have to ensure you're listening to, and as we all say now, centering those who are most impacted. And this has to belong to the whole community. So it's a both and. So those are some of the challenges. I'm kind of watching the time, so I don't want to go on too long, but anything before we move on to opportunities, very, very quickly. Bellamy, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I know that we took a bit of time, so if it happens to run over, I think the board would be not too long, but sufficient would be okay.
Well, and I will say, this is kind of embarrassing, but I actually at 9 o'clock, I have to get on another Zoom because I'm facilitating a community listening session in San Jose, California, in the wake of police misconduct when they had protests around the murder of George Floyd. So, but Cammie might host that. So, but we probably will get there. We'll probably get through this. So,
all right, fair enough.
But I also want to give you the time you need. I don't want to be worried about my clock and my time, because this is the training for you, and this is your time. So, all right. So let's move on to opportunities then. So, if we can go to the next slide. So, what are the opportunities? So we've talked about the challenges. What are just popcorn style, looking for phrases, brief thoughts, just, so we can get a list going. What are some of the opportunities that you have in front of you that maybe you're excited about, that you're nervous about, but that you see? So anybody can start.
I would say that one of the biggest opportunities is our governor has given the thumbs up for a variety of laws to support this type of organization, whereas 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been like, good luck. It would have been just a few of us meeting every now and again. But I think all eyes are on it, and us specifically. So I think that helps.
All right, so support from the governor and the assembly, the new state laws. Okay.
Yeah, I mirror that in a way that we can, have access to our legislative representatives. We could, lobby for things that perhaps individually, or I don't know if it's a board, but individually for me, it would be ending qualified immunity. It would be also, which I think is an important part of being able to create transformation. And I'll leave it at that point. I won't go any further than that.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. And again, but just think about opportunities for this board in particular. That's kind of what I'm thinking. So, and that can be an opportunity for your board. So
and there's
what else?
Collaboration.
Well, I know I just said to be brief, but could you say a couple more words about that?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, with all the these competing stakeholders, as you mentioned before, whether it's the activists, whether it's local government, whether it's the agency itself, other whether it's the clergy in the community. I know that Newark, New Jersey, just came out with a study where there was a lot of collaboration that went together with all of these, interests, and they went through 2020 without a single shot fired and without any money being paid out for police misconduct. So I think that there is an opportunity for those competing parties to collaborate to get what we as a community want in this particular vein.
Thank you.
That is
What
a
else?
good example, by the way. I grew up in New Jersey, so Newark has some serious problems when I was coming up. Like, so when I saw that headline, I was like, how is that possible? I mean, anybody that's been in the New Jersey metro area period is like, you got millions of people up there. So that is one example. Yep.
All right. Other opportunities that you all see before you as this board is continuing to come together. Okay, so we're a little light on the opportunities. So, so here's some that we thought of. The moment we're in, it's kind of the flip side of this, the fierce urgency of now. I mean, we are in a time when people want change. We may not all agree. Do we want reform? Do we want revolution? Do we want tinkering? Do we want to abolish law enforcement and carceral systems? There's a lot of discussion, but there is a moment that has lasted for years in our nation where there's a real desire and possibility of change. State law has created possibilities. Again, the trauma that communities have faced, I mean, it in a strange way can really create opportunities. Just again, thinking about the stories that have been shared tonight. As painful as they are, that history opens up the ability for people to see things differently as you share that history. You know, the calls for reforming or defunding or abolition, again, that's something that is real and tangible. I think you have the opportunity to really center the voices of the people who have been most impacted by inequality in policing and law enforcement and public safety in your community. And you can do that while you still do the impartial work of the board. But there are ways to lift up those stories, to educate law enforcement, to educate newcomers into your community. You know, where I live in Cambridge, we have about 25% of our population is new every 5 years. And we have people who've lived here for 6, 7, 8 generations who are working class families. So there's always a need to educate people and to spread that. Demonstrating legitimacy, again, people have already talked about that with different stakeholders. So I think some of the things that didn't necessarily come up as much, well, in a sense they did, but maybe it was more broadly. Changing policies and procedures. I think we were thinking about within Charlottesville, but you know, there's been talk of how can you do that, be part of an effort to do that statewide, things like qualified immunity. I think you have an opportunity to create something that's sustainable. One of the challenges for oversight traditionally has been something happens, there's a moment, something gets created, and then 3 years later, 5 years later, that energy has dissipated. The elected officials may have changed, and it's easy to just put it on the back burner, cut the funding, let it kind of drift away and become irrelevant. So you are here at the moment where you can create something that's sustainable and long-lasting in Charlottesville, and can be a model for people across the Commonwealth of Virginia. You have the chance, and in fact, you're doing it, to define the role and the work and the outcomes that you hope to see from your work. And again, I think Bellamy just talked about this, engaging all stakeholders. However that engagement happens, there needs to be engagement. It can't just be a wall. There's got to be that ongoing conversation, sometimes difficult, sometimes painful, sometimes it doesn't feel like a conversation, but that is definitely an opportunity that I think is before you. So next, I'm going to shift into a little different part, and I'm going to ask Cami to help me out on this because I'm a little tired. So the people in San Jose, they're going to see what they get. But wanted to talk very briefly about a couple of other cities that part of the NACOL network. One is New Orleans, and the other is Newark. So this isn't going to be a comprehensive history, but they are both places that we chose to talk about because as you're looking at revising your ordinance, right? You're looking at, here's what was put in place, here are some things that we think can be different, you know, even as you're in this initial phase. And other cities have gone through this, but I think in other cities, sometimes it took a long time to get there. So with New Orleans, and again, Cammie, please feel free to jump in at any moment so you can, you can unmute yourself. In New Orleans, again, I think people have a general sense of the history of New Orleans, racism, Civil War, policing, plantation owners from Haiti who moved to New Orleans so they could keep their wealth and power 200 some years ago. And in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, all sorts of horrible things that happened, the consent decree with the police department and the city after the Department of Justice came in. And so they created an independent police monitor. The idea was that you would have someone outside the police department who could review all of the investigations about complaints, who could be present when there were critical incidents and actually have staff observing so they could see how the police were doing things. But there was a problem. In New Orleans, they put that under the Office of the Inspector General. Now, to most of us, that would sound great, right? You have the Inspector General, that's an independent official whose job is within government to root out corruption, to ensure that things are being done fairly. But it was New Orleans, so there was a power struggle. There was the old guard person in the IG's office didn't have any interest in supporting civilian oversight. And even though you might say, well, this could give you more power, that wasn't what happened. So in the end, the community came together, activists, and put a referendum on the ballot. And so it changed the city charter to ensure that the police monitor was independent, that it had funding, and that it was able to be sustained in the long term. Because I tell you, it was a real challenge. When you have people trying to do this difficult work and your boss is having public fights with you, it doesn't go very well. So, but Cammie, do you want to add anything to that?
I just want to emphasize too, the key points there is that the work of transforming themselves into an independent oversight structure, and then also being able to secure the funding that they would need long term. By they have, I believe it's 1% of the police's operating budget is guaranteed to them each year, so that the department shrinks or gets larger, they still have the staff that will allow them to do the work necessary. And that has done tremendous things for their organization. Their staff has grown. They're able to do additional audits and monitoring pieces of the work. They put out great reports. I would actually suggest taking a look at some of their reports, because they not only do their annual report, but then also they have a report for their mediation program, so that they can report on that. And it's just a great way to further communicate. So I realize I strayed a little bit there, but
No,
really those two takeaways are really important, that you can start with one structure and you can see this isn't working, and you can look towards a path of making it better for the community.
Absolutely. And then let's move on to Newark, which is, Cammie and I have both done work directly with Newark and doing training. So, and you know, James, you talked about coming from New Jersey. So, you know, Newark has a long, difficult history going back generations. You know, the rebellions, the uprising, the riots that happened in the cities across the U.S. happened in Newark. You had a series of African-American mayors who talked about creating change and creating reform. Some were sincere, some were not. All had limited success. You know, Cory Booker, you know, national figure, was one of those people who worked to try to make a difference and was not as successful. But what really started things to change in Newark was a combination of community activists and the ACLU of New Jersey pushing for the Department of Justice to come in because of the decades-long history of abusive policing in Newark. You know, largest city in New Jersey, 400,000 people. Sometimes overlooked because it's right next to New York, but it's a big, important city. And when the DOJ went in, found what they found, they did a big report of their investigation. There was a consent decree. And in that case, the consent decree included creation of civilian oversight, and that is challenging but important. you have a mayor, Ras Baraka, who came in very much as a radical reformer, which may sound like an oxymoron to some people, but I personally think is a real thing. And they created an Office of Civilian Oversight. They had an ordinance, and immediately the state Federation of Police, the police union, sued. There was an injunction. The ordinance was created to try to be the strongest ordinance ever. It's going to be the model for the nation. And there may have been some overreach. Some of us, I would say, I think that. And I used to work for the ACLU before I came to the city of Cambridge. I like the ACLU, but it's a different perspective. They're external advocates. And so for the people who worked at the oversight agency, for the people who were on the board, it was very challenging. They spent years in limbo as their ordinance was litigated in court. And so in the end, they finally, in the last year, were able, and so this got established in 2016. Finally, they were able to hire investigators, and they are really building the office. The founding director has been through a lot, and she has stuck with it. And we have tried to accompany her. She still called me 2 or 3 times a year just to check in and see if we can help out. And it has moved to a different place. And part of that story of what's happened in Newark, it's not so much because the Civilian Oversight Board has done amazing things that has transformed everything, but it's part of a series of reforms, a series of changes that has led, at least this one year, to something deeply significant in the history of Newark. And it was very challenging and very painful and to get there in certain ways. And Kemi and I can share stories about our time in Newark together working with their board. But in the end, they were able to move through those challenges and get to a place where now they're about to become a real full-fledged civilian oversight agency that's doing investigations and making policy recommendations to the police department. And once again, I've talked for 5 minutes, so Kami, I know I've skipped things.
Just quickly, because I do see that James has his hand up, I just wanted to underscore the perseverance piece of that they really hung in there. One of their biggest problems during the period of time that they were being sued is that they were advised by city attorneys to be silent. They didn't say a word to the public. And so the public didn't know what was going on. They lost faith in the process. And so one of the things as a lesson learned there that I would say to all of you is that, as not everything, there are some slow periods. You all know this has taken a while for you all to be able to move forward. That regular communication, talking about what you are doing, talking about what's on the horizon is really important to keep the community engaged, because in the end, stakeholders knowing what's going on is going to help support you in the end. So that is definitely one of the lessons learned from that story, that as we saw it unfolding. And James, I see that your hand is up.
Okay, I'll go quick real fast. I know we're running out of time. I'd like to watch Newark for a few years. I haven't spent a lot of time there in recent years. I've taken the train up there, but I do think that the city has been highly gentrified, which is a huge problem in Charlottesville. And again, I can't say I'm an expert on Newark, right? But it is in the New York metro area, and it's also been a little bit cheaper to live there if you have a job in Manhattan. So I think they have brushed a lot of people. They've displaced a lot of people in Newark over time. Yeah. And that's happening in Charlottesville. And so there could be a lot of aspects. And again, I'm no Newark expert, right? But to the Newark today than the one that I could have seen in 1983 that was suffering from post riots, from companies that wouldn't move a movie theater there, right? Or just like Camden, New Jersey, which is not too far from where I grew up, where, there was 1 million liquor stores, but no supermarkets, literally no supermarkets. And they come in, and then the young professionals come in, they tear everything, down. I'm an urban planner, so I think in these terms. So, you could have all that and still have cops pulling out their gun and firing on people because it is a metropolis. But I would like to see a comparison of the incomes, the median income, who's living there now. You know, we see the same thing with DC. You know, it's highly paid young professionals come in and displace the people that have been there, and then they say, oh, there's no crime here anymore. So that is what I'm kind of wondering about with the Newark case. But in any metropolis, if there isn't a gunfire, that's pretty impressive. But again, I'd like, you know, over time, keep an eye on it and look at some of the things that have happened over the last 15 years.
And I would love to get into that discussion. I'm not an expert on Newark either. I'll just say very briefly, I think that there's a lot of that's happening, but it's a big enough city that not everyone's being pushed out, but there's definitely businesses and wealth coming in. So it's complicated. And like you say, this is happening in cities all across the country. Okay, so I think we wanted to kind of put that out there to set up this next piece, which is, just briefly, just talking about your work revising your ordinance. And again, you know, trying to be balancing the time we have and people's voices. But really, these are some of the questions that we were thinking would be really important to think about, you know, as you are looking forward. Like, as you revise this ordinance, as you get that in place, what are you thinking you want to see? Looking back at this, you know, 9-10 years from now, what do you hope? How will you measure how you're getting there? What will you say means you're being successful? How will you know? Where will you find the support and guidance to do that? And from looking at what was in the revisions to the ordinance that Cammie shared with me, I mean, you're talking about some very key things in this work: access to information, cooperation from the law enforcement agency and other parts of city government, clarifying the roles and responsibilities of the executive director. And I'll say, as someone who's the director of an oversight agency, that's important. Operating procedures and investigations, having enough flexibility that you can do what you need to do while also ensuring that you have the needed authority and information to do your work, and looking at mediation. You know, it's so often in this work, people think about, oh, we've got to find people guilty. It's almost taking a criminal justice approach. And sometimes that's necessary. You have to hold people accountable for misconduct, for illegal behavior. And sometimes there are things that are really ripe for mediation. And often it's a better outcome if you can have something where the complainant gets to be heard, the officer has to listen, but the officer also gets to share their perspective. And at the end, if you get to a place with a successful mediation, both people come away with more understanding that leads to more positive relationships in the future. So these are all things that you, in the work of revising the ordinance, have looked at from my reading. So I see James's hand. I don't want to just keep talking. Oh, and James, you're muted right now.
I did that by accident. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. All right.
My bad.
As we think about the case, this idea of revising the ordinance, you know, Cammie, I just want to ask you if you can add on a little bit too, because I mean, you've been working more closely with this than me, so I know you have a deeper perspective on it.
Well, I just want to applaud the group that has worked to put those revisions together. First of all, you know, as you all know, Liana and I had worked with the initial CRB who put the original proposals together, and watched very closely when that was not implemented exactly as originally proposed. I am very grateful that the state law has allowed you some of the authorities that will actually allow you to have the type of authority that you need to carry out the mandate. And I think that what is sometimes not understood by people who may oppose strengthened oversight is that it benefits the whole community. If you put a system into place and you don't give it the authority it needs to succeed, then it makes the problem worse than where you started. You really need, if you want it, you got to let it try to succeed. Setting up something for failure only makes problems worse. And when civilian oversight is done right, with the authority it needs and effective practices put into place, then it really does help to strengthen accountability measures, to provide legitimacy, and then eventually to build bridges, which I think in the end is something that everybody would like to see happen. I know that for many, it is seems like a goal that is so far that it's hard to even visualize sometimes, but I think that working towards that is something that effective civilian oversight can do. So.
Thank you, Cam. You know, and I actually think that's a great segue into our next slide. Actually, if you go back one.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. There we go. So thinking strategically, strategic thinking. We wanted to kind of go through all those different pieces again to kind of get you in this place of being grounded in the history, thinking about the work, thinking about how other cities have done just a little bit. And really, as you're approaching this effort, strategic thinking, and if people can't, I know someone's on the phone, so if you can't see the screen, there's an image of 3 circles that overlap. There's systems thinking, kind of big picture, systemic change or issues, creativity, thinking differently outside the box, new ideas, things that haven't been done, and vision. Really having a sense of where you want to be, where you want the work to be, where you want your community to be. And I've heard all of that in the brief time I've been able to share with you today. So, and where those all come together is strategic thinking. And so on our next slide, we have a few questions that I think looking at issues of legitimacy, political capital, political will, all of this will come up. So I do want to just take a moment and say something about each of these ideas, and then again, ask for some brainstorming. So these 4 questions here: how can you build on opportunities while addressing and understanding the challenges, right? So it's not just, we've got challenges and opportunities, but how do you actually build on those, right? And then how will you build legitimacy with all of those stakeholders that you've talked about and build goodwill for the future? You know, again, the Newark story. And then strategic, right? So a lot of stuff that you want to do. I mean, we want to change the world, even in our roles in civilian oversight. But as you get started, as you go through the work, as you're going from phase to phase, hiring a director and all of that, what are your priorities and what can you put on the back burner? What do you have to do now? What do you have to do a year from now? And what can be safely put off or worked on more slowly? And then, I mean, I think you're already doing this, but how can you adapt to the conditions that you face to achieve your mission? I mean, one way you're doing it is you're already looking at revising the ordinance. But so these are some big questions. But again, some of the things that I think about are these ideas of how do you avoid binary thinking, right? How do you do both and, not either or us against them? Even though sometimes that's reality. So I'm going to stop babbling in this kind of theoretical way. I'll leave those questions up there, and I can repeat them if anyone needs it. But again, I'm going to open it up. So I know you guys like to talk, and I appreciate what you have to say. So maybe I'm going to go around. I'll go around this time. Well, no, I'm going to let you. I'll let you all do popcorn style. So who would like to just address something on the strategic challenges and how do you see going from where you are to where you want to be? And I guess the way to frame this might be, what are one or two specific things that you're hoping that your oversight board can do that will help you build on opportunities and address challenges? Okay. Bill, I saw you on mute.
Sure. I think ultimately, at this point, just getting an operational structure in place. I think that we've done a lot of good work in terms of, the policy side and drafting the ordinance, and give kudos to Vice Chair Mendez, who's not here, for leading that effort. But none of that really matters unless we get the operational structure and we're able to do the day-to-day professional capacity viewed as a professional, independent, um, uh, objective body to be able to carry this work forward. Because if we don't, if we don't have that aspect, the community, especially those who are already, have a side eye toward us, are going to just use that as more ammunition for, why we shouldn't be here.
So you touched on almost all those questions. So thank you. That's really helpful. What else?
I think like one of my priorities in considering stakeholders is to make sure that our leadership and board members have shared, I don't know, for want of a better word, power. That it doesn't come across that one or the other seems to have more control of how this oversight board works together with other agencies or works amongst themselves, or how the tasks are parceled out between the individuals that are on this board. And I'm not necessarily talking about myself. I'm thinking about down the road. That's kind of one of the things that I think about is how is power shared? Because if you invest it in topsidedly, that's also set up for failure.
Great, thank you. Very important. What else?
I also think that transitioning back to this new normal, we got started during the pandemic, and I say this a lot, but we've never really all met in the same space, and that's just weird. I'm a people person, man. It's just weird, and that's been a challenge. And at the same time, Cammie, you mentioned there are some benefits, because I'm thinking, like, as I was listening to my my kids yelling in the background, that it is nice to be able to have a meeting without making arrangements, and driving and putting on certain clothes. But you definitely have to have in-person time, right? You're doing something so significant. We're talking about laws, we're talking about changing. We've all said it, 400 years of history, and we've done it as much as we can to date, in a virtual world with no paid staff at all, other than the good folks from the city that have helped. And we've had this rotation of city managers and all kinds of internal city stuff. So it's so transitioning into a stabilized, version of a normal, where we can be in the same place and people in general just feel more stable. Because I felt like the world has just felt unstable, the last presidency, all of that, everything that's been going on for about 15 months or so. So I think, which I guess that's back on the opportunity that we're coming out of, that instability that the whole country has been under Corona. And, let's face it, most people that are for this are not Trump supporters. I'm not getting into politics, but that just felt crazy all the time. So, so kind of rotating back into something new. Like we're a board, but we're still very new, right? Like we've never been able to come to a room and bring food, and desserts while we're working on this stuff. So I can babble on and on about all of that.
That's a real thing, though.
Weird.
I mean, we've got several boards who have started their work during this time, and there is something to be said for the how problematic the inability to break bread with each other, to actually get to know one another, because that affects how you function and collaborate with one another. So that's something I think, James, you hit on a really good point. I think as that opportunity is going to exist as you come out of this, where you can begin to really really work together. I mean, I know all of you have been working together, but really knowing each other and being able to have that collaboration and partnership in person will be very meaningful, I think, for the next phase.
And I agree. I could talk about that for a long time too, because it is absolutely a real thing. Even within NACOL, separate from the pandemic, because we're all over the country, in the kind of old days of NACOL, smaller set of oversight agencies, everyone kind of knew each other. The board would get elected, you'd have new board members, but people all kind of knew each other. And by the time I got on the board, we were starting to have people who really didn't know each other. And we'd be serving on the board, we'd meet by conference call, we weren't doing Zoom. And it worked okay, but we realized that we had to have at least a couple of meetings in person a year just to get to know each other, just to work together. I mean, you guys are all in the same community. It's not as intense, but it's absolutely real. And I think you will all find in ways that are unexpected, there will be all sorts of new insights and opportunities as you get to know each other in a human way and not just the Zoom intellectual talking planning way, but as human beings sitting in a room together, breaking bread and sharing that experience. Because to me, that's always at the core of what we do. It's about human beings and our humanity. And that's important for us too. Okay, so that's enough lecturing.
I'll just add,
please.
Breaking bread and doing all of that while following all open meeting laws.
Exactly. So what else? What are other priorities? How else do you see strategic choices that you need to make and how they will help you? Just a couple more. So Jeffrey, you haven't said anything for a while. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I mean, I'd sort of piggyback on what James and Bellamy said. I mean, again, my priorities, I keep coming back to this, are establishing credibility in the larger community. I think it's, the process has been slow. It's been laborious. We're the second iteration of the board. And I just feel like when I've reached out to some people in the Black community, I just hear that, they're skeptical about this amounting to anything other than more window dressing. And that was my concern coming on the PCRB, was I just didn't want to be part of something that was more window dressing. So I feel very strongly about what the legislature has handed us, what the governor's handed us, that we take advantage of that moment, put teeth in this ordinance, and get to work.
So before we close this aspect and move to our final closing words, anything else that someone wants to share about strategic thinking, where you need to go? Okay, I'm gonna accept that. I'm gonna move us to our next slide. So this first image, some of you may have seen this, but the text in it, in these beautiful images, nothing about us without us is for us. This is a phrase that, from my understanding, originated within the disability rights community, about all these people are going to help people with disabilities, but they weren't actually including the people who lived with disabilities in those plans. And so nothing about us without us is for us. And again, I'll just remind you that that means everybody. So it's not always easy and simple, but people have to be engaged. And the other thing we pair with this is a quote. You may have seen some of this before, but if you have come to help me, you are wasting my time. I'm sorry, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And this comes from Australian Aboriginal activists in Queensland from the 1970s. You might see on the internet attributed to a specific person, Willow Watson, who would tell people it wasn't her phrase. This was what her community said. And I think it's just as true for us in oversight. If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So we just wanted to leave you on that note.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
I like that. That's definitely something to take thought into as we move forward doing this work.
So that's the end of our formal presentation, I believe. So I don't know how much if you guys normally do Q&A after or anything like that. So, but
No, I don't think. Go ahead, James. Did you have something?
No, I was gonna say I know you got to get out to San Jose virtually. I've been out there not too long ago as well. They got a pretty cool statue on the campus of from the Olympics. I think it was the '68 Olympics with this, and they got a great statue. But you'll be there virtually.
I've never actually been to San Jose. I've been to other parts of California in the Bay Area. So
Brian, I just had one question. One question, Brian. Do you know the way to San Jose? Sorry.
It never fails.
I couldn't resist.
And normally I would have a snappy comeback, but but by the time I get to Phoenix.
All right, this is going to get away from us really quickly.
All right, fair enough. Then we will.
I was just going to say, but it's important to laugh because this work can be hard and challenging, and you have to have a sense of humor to get through it. So it's all good. It's all good.
Well, thank you, Brian and Cammie, for coming on and these trainings over the I guess these past 5 sessions. I'll let Cammie close it out with any words that she has.
I just want to say I feel it's a privilege to have been working with your community up to this point. And thank you for allowing me to spend 5 of your evenings with you. And I just want to reiterate, and I know we've talked about this before, but NACOL isn't going to disappear after this. We know that you guys have a road ahead of you, and we are here to help. We want you to be successful. And whatever we can do to help in that endeavor, we will do our best to do so. I think that you guys have an amazing group of people here, and I look forward to continuing to talk with all of you. And then there are just as a couple of follow-up things. I realized today that I'd never sent the PDF version of the last session. I will send that along with this one. I also will send, we have a lot of communities who ask for that last slide. And I will send that along as well, separately. And then if there are anything that comes up as you're working through pushing the ordinance through, let us know. We're happy to, if we need to sit in as a resource on anything, because we really feel that you've put some effective practices in there that really should be accepted and moved forward. So just let us know.
Right. And I just I know that you had taken some notes on the last session that were vital. Some of the more of the Garrity questions and some other things that you say that you were going to send along as well.
Yes.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sending those, I think that'll be helpful as we are going forward.
Yes, and I had a question for you guys. Last time, the council member that was on the call with us said that they had that the issue of privacy had been resolved. And then I saw another article that came through today where that was written yesterday, and I'm sorry, I can't even remember what online platform it was written by, but it seemed like that hadn't been resolved. So I just wondered.
Well, so we had an outside community member attorney directly make that request to the FOIA Advisory Council, and I was copied on that, as well as the city attorney here, and they, from their perspective, it has been resolved. So
Okay.
that's the avenue that we're going. It was really whether or not we had coverage under FOIA, the same as the police department would have, and the advisory council did say that those protections extended to us. There's some other work that's being done, but for our purposes, that does cover us.
Okay, that's great news.
Unless, I guess, city, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that that opinion from the FOIA Advisory Council will help. The questions that we had were whether people making complaints directly to the Civilian Review Board under our current FOIA statute could have their identities and personal information kept private. And so the FOIA Advisory Board has said that there are some options for that. But the other thing that's still hanging out there is, the attorney who made the request to the advisory council and I have been talking about this further. On July 1st, Virginia is taking action to provide that criminal investigative records, not administrative investigative records, but criminal investigative records will need to be released after an investigation is no longer active. And so it's sort of tangential to the work of the CRB. There may be instances in which the CRB will want criminal investigative files to do its own investigations or assessments, but that's a separate issue. That's not the one that everyone was worried about initially.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, and with that said, go ahead, James.
One more thing. So by completing the training that we just went through this spring, do we receive a certificate which will be equal to the one that we would have gotten for all the video trainings that you guys?
So we can put together a certificate that has this number of hours that we've all spent together. And then you can use that towards certified practitioner of oversight credentialing, which is our overall training program.
And when you get that too.
We should put it on LinkedIn. You got to.
No, but it is. No, it's a serious certification. We take it seriously, and we continue to look at it to make sure it's meeting the needs of our community and helping to promote legitimacy for oversight.
Is it so this won't actually, is it 2 years worth of, well, I know it depends on the pace of classes that you take, but what is the mark where you what is the pinnacle? What is the top certification?
So it's the CPO, the Certified Practitioner of Oversight, is the name of the certification.
Okay.
And so that is a combination of 45 hours of training, and along with conference attendance. And so I will actually, when I send you that information, I'll send you the link to all of the qualifications in there, so you guys can have that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and so we're 5 minutes over, so nobody has any other questions. I guess we'll adjourn for the evening and thank everyone for being here.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Cammie.
Thanks,
everybody.
You're very
It's
welcome.
been a
I'm glad
pleasure.
See you
look
next
forward to-
Thursday, everyone, if not before.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Take care.